good to see you today.
Good to see you.
So just to fill you in on everything that's happened. So we have a small crowd. We had 1 week where there's a bit of this snafu, and I'll have to track back the audience. Essentially went on this wild and crazy trip. So I had like plans to sort of do this, and I decided to go ahead and see the plans through. So basically the plan was that this summer that Cannalytics was going to, attend the Cannabis Con, the CannaCon conferences, and then ended out with this grand finale in Las Vegas for this Cannabis Conference, where there's a lot of big companies attending. So I decided I was leaning towards not, but then I was like, let's just see this through. So decided to go ahead and attend. So attended just to, keep spreading the Cannlytics word, keep, trying to meet people. So better to be out there than not. So took a trip, went to the Cannabis Conference in Las Vegas, and then there was a little snafu with actually hosting that week, so we had to postpone it till Thursday, but still crunched some numbers nonetheless. And so then my plan was to go back up to Washington, and because there's some action going on there. So they're migrating from their traceability system, Leaf Data Systems, to apparently an in-house traceability system.
Oh my gosh.
So it's making news because, this is the first, state developed and operated traceability system. And so
wow, I wonder what the motivation was behind that.
I think they just want data. I think the driving factor is they just want the data. They want it because some of these states like Oregon, they have almost real-time data. They publish almost yesterday's data publicly. So that means they probably have a real good measure there. And so maybe Washington's thinking like, oh, this is not acceptable, just getting intermittent, here's Heather, reports. So I think they just want a good measure of the data. Hey, Heather, just explaining what's going on in Washington.
Thank you.
I think Leaf Data Systems, could prepare them reports, but maybe it doesn't have real-time data. So now the whole system is basically, from what I've briefly heard, there's actually a meeting, I think today's the 8th, so there may even be a meeting today that I'll listen into for more details. But
interesting.
It sounds like you can at least, so if you don't have a sophisticated software system, you can at least just upload a CSV, it sounds like, to their system. So it sounds like it's just a more direct way to upload data straight to, a Washington State database. And they've, apparently maybe have some developers in-house, probably that have built some internal dashboards or whatnot. So
right. Just gives it more flexibility, it sounds like. But it probably quite a bit of, well, maybe not a lot of overhead, but I mean, that's a pretty large endeavor, right? I wonder if they're leveraging like a cloud environment, what their architecture is.
Well, this is going to be the great question, right? Because it's like the grass is always greener on the other side, right? And so I thought Leaf Data Systems was okay. So I didn't have experience with BioTrack, but basically they migrated from BioTrack to Leaf Data Systems, and there was a bunch of hubbub in the industry, and people were quite grumpy, and all the way to the present, people just there's been people quite vocal about their unhappy or dissatisfaction with the system.
Mm.
And so that may be warranted. And so who knows? That's not for me to decide. Like I said, I'm the type of person where I make it suffice. So they have an API, I can make that suffice. But
Yeah.
maybe there's room for improvement. So they're going to try something new. And like you said, it's basically like, okay, I could see, they could get it developed for maybe not that expensive, that much. And then maybe they have a small team to see that it runs. But yes, I'm
Mhm.
like you said, what did they take on as far as like data warehousing goes? So it'll be
Yeah. Yeah. When I first looked at that data, starting from zero and knowing nothing, right? It's not actually that sophisticated as far as the data structure underneath it, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. So if they're going to collect it in the same kind of way or store it in the same kind of way, it's not that big of a challenge, I wouldn't think. So yeah, hats off to them. Hopefully they'll get some good benefits out of this.
it's an interesting step forward. And so they're calling it the Cannabis 2.0 movement. And I've got a friend up there, David Busby at Open THC, and
Mhm.
he's spearheading his movement for, these open, more open source systems. So we'll see how this one pans out. I know he's been quite vocal in this process. I think people will still use software integrators. I don't think you have to.
Mhm.
So I'll fill you in next week with more details. So I'm curious about that, how everything unfolds as well.
Yeah, no, it sounds like if there's more of this movement to kind of like this Cannabis 2.0 and states having their own systems in place, and giving them more flexibility and freedom. And hopefully that means sharing more data with the public, which is good for us. So,
Exactly. And Washington wants to provide that data. So really until the adoption of leaf data systems, they had a nice public dashboard and they were trying to provide data available through an API. So I think they want to get back to that. So
mhm.
it will be exciting to see. And so
Yeah, cool.
we'll tap in right away. So
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the update on that.
definitely. And so that's pending. And so out at some wild ventures. So return to Oklahoma real quick just to put out a few fires. And then, as I said, so basically the plan is now to head to the Cannabis Science Conference in Baltimore.
Mm,
And that's on the 14th and 15th. So, shout out to the Cannabis Science Conference. So I've been to the one on the East Coast before, and I think it's an awesome place to learn. It's an awesome place to be. So this is a good place for people in the testing space to go. So, lots of experts there. You gotta, hear about the latest science that's been being done, the people using the latest and greatest testing techniques.
hmm. Isn't that where Heather is based?
And yeah, I was going to say, well, Heather, we may have to say hey because, I somehow wound up in Paul's neck of the woods and somehow I'll end up in your neck of the woods. So maybe we could grab, well, maybe you could join me for the meetup next week because it will be about that same time in person.
Is it too late to, like, can you not join virtually?
Oh,
So
no.
I'm an hour and a half from Baltimore.
We definitely will, Heather. I'm just saying, I'll be in your neck of the woods.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, no,
Um,
that's nice. Yeah, have fun. I would like to get to Baltimore soon. They have the aquarium, I think, is free at some points during the week. So, if you have time for leisure activities, I would recommend that.
Well, trying to stay focused on work, as fun as it may be, still trying to keep my nose to the grindstone. So focusing, but long story short, just sort of, I thought it would be curious to visit a handful of laboratories along the way. So I haven't had the best luck yet here. So basically going through Missouri. So there are technically medical cannabis dispensaries here and medical testing laboratories here. I have not, one was closed when I got there yesterday, but like I said, a few have been shut down. So maybe they had ambitions for opening and running, but just never got things set up. And so, that's why, Cannalytics is really here, because, it's like a shame, right? Because, someone's got these ambitions to set up a lab, but then it just, falls through because they don't have all the know-how. It's a real shame. So, we're just trying to, help where we can. So we're, seeing, okay, well, what are laboratories like, here in Missouri that are predominantly testing for CBD and medical. So I'll visit a few more laboratories today and fill you back in. And then I'll be curious to stop at the ones I think on the way. May as well just essentially, and that's the data that I was planning to perhaps look at today with you. So it's essentially Illinois, which we talked about is, quite regulated, only a handful of cultivators. Honestly, it's actually kind of funny. Now that I think about it, I think there's maybe 21 or so provincial licenses, but there may be almost 11 or so laboratories. So there's almost, so there's one laboratory for every 2 cultivators. So that's a really interesting dynamic. So do you have
any theories behind? I can't echo here. Sorry. Any theory behind why the ratio is like that?
So some ex ante, so some prior beliefs. So perhaps my guess is they still need to produce the quantity that's demanded. So these 21 cultivators are probably producing a staggering amount. So that would basically be, maybe they're not all giant, but I imagine it's almost like you just took the top producers in, say, Washington or Oregon, what have you. You just took all the top producers and you just had, say, 20 of them in one state. I know they're just issuing some craft growing licenses, so you should see some craft growers coming online. So back to the testing. So they're probably still producing a large scale of cannabis. And so I need to dig deep into the Illinois testing requirements. But if they're still having to test every, say, 5 pounds like they do in Washington or what have you, that's still a lot of testing to be done. So there could still be a lot of testing by the laboratories, but actually, just to be frank, at the CannaCon in Chicago, it sounded like one of the speakers, he was a little vague about it, so it wasn't certain, like, oh, which state this is in, but it sounds like perhaps, and I don't want to make any assertions or anything, but it sounds like maybe that sometimes some cultivations, maybe like one step away, somebody owns a licensee. So like somebody's, uncle's brother owns a license,
Yeah.
owns a testing license.
Yeah. When you see, I mean, any kind of system where you see kind of like these, what's the word I'm looking for? A situation where you don't have a long tail, right? And it seems like there's not much of a long tail in Illinois from how you're describing it. It sounds like there's other things at play in what is supposed to be a natural system, right? There's there's influences being probably exerted in some way or another.
It's just a small number of players. Like when you look at, so if you study like industrial organization, which is sort of when economics sort of takes a look at, market competitiveness and okay, like how do things shake out in a market? So how many firms are there? How does the government regulate those firms? This and that. One of the main factors you just look at is, okay, how many firms are there? How many producers are there? And so that's essentially my measure is, okay, there's how many licensees are there? And then you can kind of try to control for the population. So say, oh, how many licensees per capita? So, that, and I think that's almost kind of what we're here to do with the group is try to sort of measure, okay, what are some of the effects of this? So, okay, just anecdotally, prices seem higher in Illinois, but can we, measure that? Or does it have an effect on sales? So I'm not really sure what the what the effects are. It's just really at the stage of just sort of making observations, because
that's exactly what this is, right? An observation. It's just depending on what angle you're coming from, though. For me, I like to see healthy competition, especially in like a new industry like this, right? Because that churn and competition ends up serving the community better, I think, over the long term. So, it's just something to think about. It's interesting that you brought that up, and I'll probably be sitting in the back of my mind now why, Illinois seems to have this kind of, I don't know, again, it's just an observation, but just sort of this low number and high ratio of, labs to producers.
Well, a couple factors. I think one, it's sometimes like in economics, like the unintended consequences. So it's like, okay, maybe they intended, okay, we're going to really write some real fine-grained, rules, so to, really keep people safe. But maybe the rules are so stringent that only, like, they say, oh, we need to make sure that they can pay if something goes wrong. So let's make sure they have like $5 million in funding, or something like that. And so it's like, oh, maybe there's a good intention behind that, but then that cuts off a bunch of people. And so, the unintended consequence may be, oh, you ended up with a really concentrated market, and when things are, concentrated, they may not necessarily end up best for the consumer. Not necessarily, but.
No, it's just interesting to think about. I'm glad you brought that up. It's just one of those things to sort of kind of keep in mind, which states tend to be more competitive or have a more vibrant market, right? With, thinking with the consumer in mind. Maybe there's opportunities there to look at states and have some sort of normalized baseline on competitiveness, whatever that metric could be, right? Which states seem to be more competitive than others.
it's funny you bring that up. So that's essentially my proposed measure. Like I said, it was basically, okay, licensees per capita. I think we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, that's a start. So
Right.
I mean,
And I
I have a
apologize for not
comment.
being. Oh, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, about competition. So I think that with places like Maryland, the competition is not going to be very high just because we have medical. So, like, if you end up going to Baltimore to visit, you'll find that eighths are, they could be $65, $60. So we have some large, really large companies here that are able to thrive in a very non-competitive environment. That's my only input for Maryland, and I know it's maybe very dour, but I'm being very realistic. Thank you.
ooh, and that raises a point. So it's, so say we were just looking at prices, and that's tricky as well because, there's different effects that affect prices. So like, it's just in Las Vegas and like, the prices were high, but that's because, demand is really high. So as soon as you like, you leave the city, the prices kind of anecdotally start to fall because, just looking kind of at reviews online and they said, oh yeah, as soon as you get outside of the, the Las Vegas strip, if all of a sudden the prices plummet because, demand plummets, everybody's right there just walking around. So yeah, it's going to be tricky to just real tricky to parse out because maybe demand is just extra, and it actually probably is really high in Illinois because you have a lot of out of, I think they admittedly say, they've got a lot of out of state traffic, right? Because I think they maybe tax residents differently. So that pushes prices up because you just have all this demand. And then, if they restrict supply, that will also raise prices as well. So, but prices are, that's just arguing over surplus. My main thing is, how does that affect testing? Do you want, like, so for example, like California's got pretty strict limits. And so it's like, that's really pushed down, that's made products clean. So a couple weeks ago, we were looking at like residual solvents and concentrates in Washington. And they wouldn't have sold, they would have failed quality assurance or quality control testing in California. And so that's my wonder is, okay, like how does maybe a state like Illinois compare to Oklahoma as far as like, testing and contamination of the products and whatnot? Because, so for example, just to rag on Oklahoma a bit, I know I've been real pro Oklahoma. There's been an article out recently saying, okay, a lot of this flour is actually quite high in heavy metals and processors, because right, the cultivators go through and now you've got the processors, and what happens is things like heavy metals, microbes, believe it or not, and yeah, so and pesticides, all of those get concentrated down as well. So when you're concentrating you're extracting all the THC, you're extracting all the pesticides and potentially heavy metals as well. So if you take borderline passing flour, a lot of it, and then you concentrate it down, you're your concentrated product may fail pesticides or heavy metal testing, even though the flower didn't. And so what processors in Oklahoma are finding is, okay, well, this is a big problem because now we're having trouble sourcing flower for our production process. Because not only do we now need to make sure that people have passed their quality control tests, but also that they've passed them, you know, with enough, with limits low, and or I mean with, even if say they had just something detected, that it was detected low enough that if it's concentrated, it's not going to be, you know, an unacceptably high limit.
Yeah, it's like they're looking for a buffer, right?
Exactly. And so I guess there's not really that much to do except just to spread knowledge. Just say, okay, and you know, that's where Canaletics is trying to help. So something we're going to try to do, we would love to do, is essentially try to start measuring some of, you know, if we can partner with labs that provide anonymous data to essentially try to say, you know, try to provide some, you know, distributions of some of these compounds. So that way you kind of can know what to expect. So that way, if, you know, say you did get a hit for just a, you know, say, you know, what are some of these pesticides? I don't know. Or like cadmium, or, you know, so say you get some hit for some, you know, relatively, you know, obscure, you know, heavy metal or pesticide at a small, at what you think is a small concentration. You know, it would be helpful to know what exactly is a small concentration. So just to kind of look at, you know, the distribution out there. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because quality is going to be a competitive differentiator, right? It seems like, especially if these processors are just consolidating, get larger and larger, and they're more under the microscope, they're going to be pushing on their producers, right, to give me something that's high quality, or they'll just not survive in the market.
You would think
or go
so.
black
And
market.
so when I talk to the dispensary owners, I ask them, like, okay, you know, do you care about, you know, pesticide testing or this or that? And oftentimes they're just, you know, looking to make sure that things, you know, got the state mandated testing, and just to, you know, make sure that they're, you know, following the traceability system and with the regulations. But I don't think they really promote it. And I don't actually have evidence to back this up, but anecdotally, I've heard that, okay, you know, once consumers know about pesticide testing, then they, you know, care about it at that point. So I guess that predominantly matters in, like, say, Washington State, where it's not mandated yet. So some people try to advertise like, oh, you know, we're pesticide free, but I think that's under advertised. So
Interesting.
But just a hunch that, you know, and it could be one of those things where maybe the companies have done the market research and they've said, okay, you know, the segment that actually cares about their products being clean may actually be a small segment of the market, and so maybe they've already done their homework. And
yeah, what do you think the probability is that they've actually done their homework?
That's a really good question. So I bet you some people have tried to answer that question. So maybe there have been some surveys done, but I don't know, because I really feel like they're, people doing market research are just so focused on other questions, that stuff like, oh, do you care about pesticide testing? Like, I just don't think that,
Yeah,
like, say they have 10 survey questions. Like, I just can't see them
right. They're trying to sling products, right?
putting
They're
that on
trying to,
them.
increase their margins, and they have their financial drivers until it becomes a thing, an awareness thing. Then it's probably, you're right. It's probably not going to be a forefront, top of mind for some of these companies.
I think people who are doing it right and doing it at scale, or taking it into consideration, whether they kind of realize it or not. So that was one thing I saw at, like, the Las Vegas conference. So like people in like California, they were running these, really immaculate facilities. And I talked to a lab that there's some people that work at a lab in California, and they say, yes, it's really hard for cultivators to pass the testing. And so that's actually one of the reasons why it's hard for people to come into California. So they're saying, oh yeah, so you think you're good in your state, and so a lot of cultivators, so say you may get big in Michigan, and you think, oh, I'll just go set up a grow in California somewhere and try to enter that market. And apparently it's just ridiculously hard to pass their quality control testing, because probably, it's California, maybe there's, pesticide drift from here or there. And so, you really have to have these, like clean rooms, like these real clean facilities to, to make sure you're passing quality control.
Yeah, such a interesting balance that has to take place, because if you have a California that's really strict and they're trying to do the right thing, but then how much are they driving the market into the black market? And then I don't know.
And that's what you always have to sort of wonder, is whenever there's high finances at stake, right? Like there's a lot of money at stake, like especially in the California market. And then, you see things kind of getting restricted, it's just it just never seems to end well. So,
Yeah.
But that's just sort of the way it is. It's just a lot of like competing interests, right? Because the existing producers, maybe they spend all their money and they've got a nice clean room. Like they don't want to see a lot of entrants come in. So they have their incentives, and I'm sure people from out of state are trying to loosen up the regulations so that they can come in, and it's just kind of battering back and forth. As an economist, I like to just try to say, okay, I'm just sort of an outside observer, and I'll just sort of make observations as these parties essentially battle it out for, and just kind of how things shake out. And the public's part of it. And so so for example, in Michigan, right, the public has been pretty strong, right, because they've kind of held up, right, like home grow and whatnot for quite a while. And they've, it sounds like, kind of fought off some of the bigger interests for a while.
Yeah, there's a lot of local municipalities that are calling the shots for the producers. Yet some towns that want nothing to do with it, and you have other towns that are totally great with it. It just there's an interesting mix in Michigan in that respect. As far as like big players, I don't really know too much about that. Have you heard of any big companies trying to? I know that there's several large grow facilities that are well financed, but I haven't heard of any like big name corporate players.
So what I think is interesting about the Midwest is that's where people are really starting to like really dabble and experiment with what's called, multi-state. They call them multi-state operators in the industry, MSOs. And so the Midwest sort of opens itself up naturally to that. So it's like, okay, say you're one of the people that are lucky enough to operate in Illinois. Well, then you can probably also operate in, it sounds like, Michigan. It sounds like you could potentially operate in Ohio. And maybe maybe I'm leaving one out, but I think those are the ones they start in, and then they maybe then expand to maybe Colorado.
What do you have any idea what drives that? The propensity for MSOs in the Midwest
to expand into different states?
Yeah. So what is it about the economics in the Midwest that makes it more?
I think they're just looking for new markets. So in just the geographic closeness, right? So if you're selling in like Chicago, it's not like that far to Michigan and Detroit. So you could have your cultivator, like your head cultivator could almost go back and forth, because so that's what a lot of places do. So say you have multiple cultivation sites. Well, you're going to have, your local employees at each one. However, like the head grower and the people who install things, they're sort of going to go from cultivation to cultivation. So like your head grower will come in and set up shop and say, okay, this is how we're going to do things. Here are standard operating procedures, and they see to it that everything gets installed correctly. And then they probably hire, a local manager, so to speak, to oversee things. But then they'll probably definitely come in if it's like, oh, like there's mold, or oh, we've got some pest. They'll zip, they'll just zip there right away. Probably identify what's going on and try to fix it. Just kind of putting out fires.
Right.
And so it would make, so that's my hypothesis, and maybe it's similar at dispensaries too, like maybe a cash register. I'm not as experienced in the dispensary world, but essentially you have your executives just sort of putting out fires here and there, and then you've got your local talent running the operations.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And it's also a big thing that, okay, well, with each state you operate in, you have to jump through all the rules, and you have to operate under all of those rules in that state. And so that's a big cost. And so you have to sort of strategically enter markets. And so if you're in California, you can expand a lot in California. So it's like, okay, do I even really want to go try to set up shop in Colorado and worry about all of Colorado's rules? So a lot do. But some say, oh, well, maybe I'll just go set up shop in Northern California or something like that. So
interesting.
Oh, I don't know if this is common sense. Please pardon me, but Steep Hill Analytics is a multi-state cannabis testing lab. So when you're asking about multi-state businesses, that would be one of them. That covers Maryland, Massachusetts, and now to a small degree, New Jersey. Thank you.
Exactly. In fact, almost every state I look at, there's Steep Hill, and so they're awesome. They were probably the first cannabis testing lab that I heard about. probably saw some documentary or something, some show that mentioned Steep Hill. So that was my first exposure to cannabis testing, was just hearing about them. And they're sort of a great story, right? Because they've shown that, okay, I'm not certain they may franchise in some of the states, but they've shown that, okay, it's possible to do laboratory testing multi-state. And there's been a couple others that have cropped up, but they don't have quite the widespread, they're not quite all over. And like I said, I'm fairly certain Steep Hill is just sort of franchising. So maybe there may just be a lab that wants to open and they maybe work out some deal there. So I think these are interesting to look at, because yes, this is something that I'm trying to figure out too, is, okay, how can laboratories operate in multiple states? What does it take? How can they pull it off successfully? Because, I've talked with a lot of laboratories and a lot have, ambitions to do it. It just, it's a tricky feat, because believe it or not, laboratories don't really, here's somebody new. They don't really scale like geographically that well, because you have such high capital costs. And so I hope. Hello, Debelle. We're talking about how laboratories can scale at the moment. So welcome to the conversation.
Hi, I'm just going to sit back and observe for now, just see what's all about. But hi, everyone. I'm going to go update myself.
By all means. So essentially, we're talking about, okay, how can cannabis licensees expand to multiple states? And then we started talking about, okay, well, how can laboratories expand to multiple states? And in fact, how could they even expand within their states? They set up what's called like a satellite lab. And so basically, this is the problem, right? At a given laboratory, you may have about $1 million plus worth of scientific equipment. So that's just capital that has to be at that physical location. And so this is your pesticide testing instrument, your LC-MS. You need to test for heavy metals, perhaps, an ICP-MS, cannabinoids, HPLC. If you're testing micro, you're going to have this whole micro station, which is, you want this nice clean room and all, they need all their lab supplies. So if you're going to set up like a whole nother lab, then you're going to need to get all these other instruments. And so that's going to be a whole nother capital expense. And in fact, that's like the primary hurdle of opening a laboratory is, okay, I need $1 to $2 million. And you don't actually need this, by the way. But a lot of people think, oh, I need $1 to $2 million worth of funding to open a lab. And the reason I say you don't necessarily need this is I've heard people in the lab space speak, and they say, hey, if you're looking to enter, just do what you can do. I don't actually know how this would work out as a business model, but this is what some people argue is just start out with a micro lab. So that may cost $10,000 to $15,000. I personally, coming from an economics point of view, I'm not certain that would work out economically to provide just micro testing.
Yeah, because if I want to get my test, I don't want to have to shop around and get different parts of the test accomplished in different places, right? That's a real sap in my productivity and getting things out the door.
Exactly. And so maybe you could work up some odd contracts, or perhaps you may even have to start not in the cannabis space. So say, oh, I'm just going to do micro testing and try to find like some food company or some, just sort of do some odd micro tasks. So that's a route. Like I said, I'm not the biggest proponent of that route. The most successful way that I saw it was done, and like I said, you have to be early in the game. So there's Jeff Dowdy at Capital Labs, and I probably told this story, but I'll tell it again real quick. But there's Jeff Dowdy at Capital Analysis in Olympia, Washington. And early on, I think he was a cultivator perhaps, and he just bought an HPLC to, test the cannabinoids of his own products. And then, he started talking and, other cultivators wanted him to test their products. And so, he essentially turned into a laboratory, just starting with an HPLC testing cannabinoids. And then, so this is, if you were starting in a brand new state, this may be doable. So this would be like the rags to riches story is you get the HPLC, scrounge up enough to get an HPLC, which is not cheap. Like that's the price of a nice car. So that's going to be $40,000 for an old HPLC that, comes from some, it's a hand-me-down from some school, and it's probably got a bunch of creaks and cracks, and it's like not going to be operating. It's going to be wonky for sure. Well, not for sure, but I'm sure you can get it dialed in. But there's going to be there'll probably be little pieces that may break, or you may have to do some repairs here and there. So, but that's the laboratory space. And so then he worked up and, got like a GC, so you can start testing residual solvents and terpenes. And then, then you set up your micro station, and then in Washington State, you can almost do everything at that point. And then you can save up enough money to get the LCMS, which is like 300,000+, and all the other fancy equipment for doing heavy metals. You can't really do that in like California, or probably not in a lot of these states. You probably can't really do it in Washington State anymore, just because testing's fairly competitive there these days. I don't know about Colorado, but I mean, like I said, you could almost do it in Oklahoma. They do require the pesticide and heavy metal testing, but I bet there's a bunch of people there that just need cannabinoid tests, just to measure their products and do terpene testing. So you could probably do that story in Oklahoma. A little difficult because they do have mandated pesticide and heavy metal testing.
You're saying that the lab environment doesn't scale very well.
Oh, yes.
So when you look across the industry from seed to sale, would you say that the lab is probably the, I don't know what the right term to use is. It's not a choke point, but it seems like it might be the most restrictive part of the entire value chain?
Well, going back to, industrial organization, where we're just looking at the number of firms, like that's the first thing I look at. So if you just look at the number of firms, okay, the most is typically cultivation, maybe dispensary, but typically cultivation. Then you have, actually, we were just looking at this in Oklahoma. And it was about like 60-70% were cultivation. And then there's about an equal number, about 15% or so are dispensary, about 15% are processing. And then in Oklahoma, I think it was less than 1% for everyone else. So you have, and it's typically smaller than that. So yeah, so really small number of labs. And so industrial organization tries to explain that. Why is that? Well, there's a couple factors going on. One, there's regulations. So like in Missouri, they said, okay, we're only going to give out 10 cannabis testing licenses. So that's just a regulation limit thing. So maybe there was going to be 1,000, but there's only a limit. But there probably wasn't going to be a limit of it. There's probably not going to be 1,000, because the other thing that's going on is you have high barriers to entry, which are high capital costs. But I just don't want to say, okay, and I think there's other things going on, because I want to say the capital costs are lower than well, there's a couple things going on, I guess, with cultivations. Is you have a lot of small producers that are maybe entering with smaller amounts of funds. But I think like the large producers, I mean, even the medium, like I was just at the conference and they were saying, oh yeah, if you want to open a dispensary, you need like 2 to 5 million. And I'm thinking like, that's more than you really need to start a laboratory. And cultivation, they're also spending, several million. Like I said, you can start for cheaper, but there are people doing that. So I want to say it may not even be the high capital costs. It could be these other things. So, and I'm kind of just
sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but you just made me think of something. I mean, human capital, right? I mean, the specialized technical expertise that you have to run a lab is different than, the cultivators obviously have to know what they're doing, but there's a different, I think, depth of knowledge that probably has to be there for the lab.
And I think I'm going to have to hit the industrial org book after this, because I think you're right, because essentially that's what it comes down to. And that's what I was saying, like, okay, so say you did set up a satellite lab. Well, it will say you set up a lab in a way across the country. Well, now you're going to have to get the local talent, which in this case is a handful of chemists and a handful of microbiologists and a quality assurance manager and a scientific director. And those are all like really from the entry level all the way up are fairly skilled positions. I mean, comparing like an analyst, not to be mean to anyone, but comparing an analyst to like just someone doing, like say trimming at a cultivation, or someone just doing sales at a dispensary. You don't necessarily need like a scientific degree to do sales, or just do like maintenance at a cultivation. But it's really preferable to have somebody, like I said, they're in short demand, but it's really preferable to have somebody with a degree in say biology or chemistry or something similar working at your laboratory.
Yeah.
Because it's when you have your analysts there, you want to get them trained up and doing cool things. So that's kind of what's going on at the laboratory. So yes, your analysts are doing routine sample extractions, but you kind of want them trained so that they could ideally do troubleshooting. It would be in an awesome world, they could do minor maintenance on your instruments, like minor routine maintenance, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. I keep saying that word interesting, and all of it's interesting, but when you're looking at it systemically, right, across, I keep saying the value chain, but across the industry, it's it's kind of cool to point out where some of these like high value parts of the value chain are. And it just, in our conversations, it seems like, I know lab is your thing, but it just seems like, and you talk to a lot of people across the country and all different parts of the industry, but it just seems like lab is that place that without it, the whole thing kind of falls apart, depending on what the state mandates for their testing, of course. And some states are more lax than others, but you've got to have that piece in play, or the rest of the system doesn't work. At least for the legitimate economy. The black market is a whole different thing, but for the legit economy, it's got to be in place. It's got to be working. It's got to be functional.
Well, exactly, because it's just another measure, right? You got to be measuring the cannabinoids and like what's actually in the products, just like the labels, and then the quality control is an important aspect, right? We're trying to have a well-functioning industry here. We're trying to show you like the cannabis industry, like we're doing it right here. So you're right. It's a big part, and people are a big part. So it comes down to people and just kind of bringing the community together, right? So as the cannabis industry comes more into the mainstream, right, there's going to be more scientists and more chemists and more microbiologists who are willing to say, yeah, I'll be part of the industry. Yeah, I'll do that type of testing. So I could see there being a lot more talent available in the future. And I think it's just sort of bringing people into the space, showing them what it's about. It's just testing like any other product, and it provides a lot of value, especially to do it right. To do testing right provides a lot of value. So we need everyone we can get. So come on, scientific community, like let's join together on this one and do a great job.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel, but that's what Cannalytics is about. So
good conversation.
So we didn't quite break out the data today, but that's okay because the data can wait till next week. And it's always awesome to have good conversations. That's what we're here for. So anyways, I think maybe go ahead and conclude it a couple minutes early today, unless anyone's got more thoughts on the table for today.
No, just thanks for the good conversation and the education as always.
Oh yes, definitely, Paul. Thanks for coming, and DeBelle, we'll have to hear from you and your interests, your background, and how. Well, actually, DeBelle, if you not to put you on the spot, but you wouldn't mind sharing real quick, just like what your background may be, like, so just like what angle are you coming at the group from?
At this point, okay, just a bit about myself. I am a data scientist now, and I pretty much, I'm intrigued about cannabis, and I never thought of like combining the two of them. So I was looking up tech groups on meetups, and I saw it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's interesting. So at this point, I'm coming from an educational point of view. I do not know a lot about analytics, and so it's just a very interesting topic for me. So I'm just like, pretty much, let us see what's about, and like see how I can't necessarily have an opinion. I'm just like learning at this moment. So that's why I was very quiet during the conversation, because I was like, oh yeah, what's going on?
You're in the right place. So that's where we're all here. I'm learning just like everyone else, just here observing like everyone else. And so yeah, you're in the right place, and that harks on what we were just talking about. So we're just trying to bring more people into the space. Yeah, just show them what it's about, show them some of the science, and have fun while we're doing it, because we're just trying to help it today. So anywho.
And yeah, it doesn't sound like it's fun. Like it's like just a great conversation. And I'm sorry I was late. I literally, yeah, I tried to join and then my internet connection went off. And whenever I came back on, I completely forgot until it was that late. I'm like, okay, just join, but I'll be early next week, like right on time.
You're always welcome to join, to bin and devour, and I'll try to get the recording up, just if you want to revisit.
I absolutely would actually, just so I get a more of a strong idea of what's going on. Yeah, I absolutely would. But thank y'all for being so welcoming.
Yes. Yes. So thank you all. So thank you all for coming, and I will go ahead and wrap it up now. So
Okay. Have a good week, everybody.
until next week, yeah, have an awesome week, and yeah, share any interesting cannabis data that you may find. Always interesting.
Okay.
But until next
Thanks a
time.
lot, Keegan.
Bye now.
Bye, guys.